Hi, this is lesson 3.11, Developing American Identity. How do we go from being British subjects and British citizens to becoming Americans? I know it's easy because it's a new country, so you call yourself an American, but in this lesson, we are going to look at what it really means to be an American. And by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the continuities and changes in American culture. What aspects of the earlier culture did we keep, and how did we keep them, and how did we change and form a uniquely American identity with unique art and architecture? So this is switching gears a bit. This is more cultural history and more social history. Let's do key concept number one. This is forms of national culture. Your culture is your music, your pastimes, your games, what you value, etc. So when we're talking about culture, we have a new form of a national culture, which is very distinct from Europe. And this is the idea of no more hereditary privilege. Gone is the aristocracy. In are the ideas of freedom and liberty. But how do those ideas manifest themselves? Part of it is with our national symbols. We have new symbols that are chosen and adapted during the American Revolution. The first of which is the American flag, the red, white, and blue with the stars representing the states. No one's sure who made the first flag. Remember that old Betsy Ross legend? We're not sure. Needless to say, the flag is still a symbol that is used to rally behind. We also choose a Greek goddess, a warrior goddess, Columbia, to represent the personification of the United States. She is seen majestic and powerful. So the idea of the United States as a warrior, channeling that ideology, is super important. We also hold on to the idea of American exceptionalism, that we are God's chosen people. The victory over a powerful country, the British, only validates that we are indeed chosen by God, blessed by God. We are indeed a city on a hill. The eyes of the world are upon us to make it right. So that is also part of our culture that's ingrained within us, that we are America. And we take that to heart. Moving on, there are some regional variations if we start in the north and work our way south. The northern region, especially in New England, holds on to the Puritan culture. There is a greater emphasis on Christian moral behavior. There is a greater emphasis on literacy and learning to read, because you had to be able to read the Bible. Every person in New England was expected to learn how to read, thus reading the Bible. So you see more schools, and when the first public schools are developed, they're developed in Massachusetts, a New England state. There is an emphasis on hard work, this Puritan work ethic, that if you work hard, you will be successful. That is the key to success. So there is a big emphasis in the North on these American fundamental values: liberty and freedom, equality. However, much of the power still was in the hands of the elite, and many of the elites still were making decisions. Moving on to the South, the southern colonies, and become the states, they see themselves still almost as colonial era British, is this antebellum culture, antebellum meaning before the war. And there are these large homes, these majestic homes, these plantations. There are vast agricultural estates. There are codes of family honor. Dueling is one way to save your honor and protect your name. And in the South, there was this ability, if you had money, to let others do everyday labor while you live a life of leisure. You view yourself as a planter gentleman, or a gentleman planter, like Thomas Jefferson viewed himself. Only a very, very, very tiny portion of Southern society had the ability to be men and women of leisure. Most Southerners barely scraped by and they worked super hard. However, most white Southerners still hoped to achieve that dream of living in a giant house, letting others do the work for you. So that becomes essential to their culture. In the South, it's where we see the American fundamental values play out the least. The majority of people in the South had a crushing, back-breaking day of hard labor. They were either poor whites or worse, they were slaves, and they had no hope to achieve that idea of the fundamental American values. Moving on to the Western region, there is this idea of rugged frontierism, and this is the most similar to the early days of colonial settlements such as Jamestown and Plymouth. You struggled daily. You had to figure out how to survive. You had to carve out an existence with the natural world, or you would face devastation and death. Pretty simple. If you didn't learn how to live, you died. Of all three regions, the West best exemplifies the ideas of the American fundamental values. Most people were equally struggling to try to figure out how to survive. There was very little government, and without a government, there was very few limits to your individual freedom. So we see the manifestation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, wealth, happiness most in the American West. And again, the American West might still just be like Illinois, right? We're not talking the Wild West here at this point throughout the course of time. Our next key concept is all about how the American national identity finds a newfound expression in works of art, literature, and architecture. We develop this style, or we actually pick up on this style of architecture called neoclassicism. It is new classical, neo meaning new, classical meaning reverting back to the early civilizations of Greece and Rome. And this idea becomes super popular in the United States. It becomes the hallmark of our government buildings. Think about the White House. Think about the Capitol building, neoclassical architecture, columns, very much like the Greek buildings, such as the Parthenon, with the large stone-heavy facade. That becomes a symbol of our power and our prowess, so to speak. Art begins to celebrate heroes such as the portrait of George Washington. Another form of art that becomes popular is this romanticizing of the American Revolution and the founding of our nation. So you see lots of art depicting our hero, George Washington, in his various uniforms and in various battles throughout the Revolutionary War. So the founding fathers themselves do quite a good job because they elevate art and literature to the role of iconic heroes. So because there were so many paintings done of the founding fathers, and the founding fathers commissioned so many paintings, they become almost revered, so to speak. Washington reaches almost godlike status during the post-revolutionary era, and he's just one of many. And last, the idea of large-scale open places, not just the architecture that's neoclassical, but open public spaces and open public town squares and things like that become quite iconically American, even though we borrow it from Europe and we borrow it from Greece and Rome. But that idea of these large sweeping landscapes and vistas is worked into our cities. So frequently you would see a town square and the government buildings centered around the town square. So that's a very short lesson, and I hope that you are able to explain the continuities and changes of American culture.